Move Tucson. All right, is that showing up?
It looks like it. Yep, there it is.
Excellent. All right, so far so good. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Patrick Hartley. I'm the Complete Streets Program Coordinator with the City of Tucson and the co-project manager of the Move Tucson initiative. And I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to present this evening and discuss the Move Tucson initiative and what we're trying to accomplish in the city. As with many of you, we're kind of transitioning and figuring out these virtual meetings and trying to keep the momentum up for this process as we work at distance and kind of work our way through a number of these virtual meetings. So this evening I have a short 15-20 minute presentation for you about exactly what is Move Tucson, what it is we're trying to accomplish. I can show you one of our online engagement tools that we're hosting right now, step you through how that works, and then take questions and open it up for discussion. So with that, I will get moving into the presentation. So what is Move Tucson? It's essentially a planning initiative, long range for the City of Tucson specifically, that will direct mobility and transportation investments for the next 20+ years. We're really going out and making sure we're taking this first period of the planning effort to listen to the community to make sure that the input is really driving the decisions that we make to help us identify the priorities, policies, and ultimately a project list that hopefully will transform our transportation future. So everything's on the table right now, and we're just going out and hearing from the community, looking at the data to see what it is that we need to try to achieve through this long-range planning horizon. So why is it important? As many of you, I'm sure, are very well aware, transportation is really fundamental to the form of our city. It shapes our community and really has a major impact on our urban form and everything about what Tucson is. At its most fundamental level, the transportation system connects us to jobs and opportunity. That's what a lot of people think of. That's what we all think about when we think of transportation. But importantly, it's also kind of key to upward mobility. It gives people access to new economic opportunities. And there's been studies out that have shown that it is a strong predictor in terms of commute times, your opportunities for moving up the socioeconomic ladder. It also moves important goods both into and out of our community. So we need to have a functioning transportation system to make sure goods are getting on our shelves, but also to make sure that our goods producing industries here in Southern Arizona are being supported to support our local economy, being able to move things out of the city. And then it impacts our health and quality of life, both in terms of active transportation opportunities, but also recognizing that our streets are our largest public space in the city of Tucson. And I think we've seen more and more in the last couple of months that people are using them then in different ways than we traditionally think of the way our streets are used, that a lot of neighborhoods are now using them for recreation opportunities since the shelter-in-place order has been put in place as a way to get out, to recreate, to talk to their neighbors, to our neighbors, in a way that's safe and socially distant. So there's a lot that's wrapped up in a lot of activity that occurs on our streets that we need to be thinking about in this process that goes well beyond just moving from A to B in the morning commute time and the evening commute time. And we're really at the precipice of kind of a transportation revolution. Our mobility options are certainly changing. They have been changing for a few years. I mean, it's just been a couple of years since Uber and Lyft have really arrived on the scene. So now we're starting to see widespread use of shared mobility services. We now have bike share in the city of Tucson and have recently seen an expansion or the appearance really of the e-scooters and the shared scooter system. More than that, as we look out over this 20-year horizon, one of the things that we're trying to keep our eye on is to make sure that we're trying to consider how emerging technologies are going to affect the transportation landscape, in particular vehicles that are able to communicate with one another, that communicate with infrastructure, and ultimately, potentially, that have some form or some level of autonomy, be it taking over control at certain times, certain periods, or full autonomous vehicles. That's yet to be determined, but they're things that we need to be thinking about as we look longer term in terms of the investments in our transportation system. And then we're facing a number of challenges on our streets, as many of you, I'm sure, are well aware. We have a lot of transportation infrastructure here in the city of Tucson, and a lot of it is older, and we're seeing the wrinkles on it. Our infrastructure is aging, it's getting beat up. We have a lot of potholes, and we have a responsibility to maintain the condition of that infrastructure. One of the things that we need to work through in this Move Tucson initiative, as we think about over the 20 years how we're prioritizing our budgets, how much of that is to really just maintaining what it is that we already have versus optimizing or expanding our transportation infrastructure. So that's I think a key discussion that we're trying to have through this process. We've seen a growing number of preventable lives lost in traffic accidents in the last few years, and that's been increasing at a very fast rate since about 2017. We're trying to get a handle on what's really driving those numbers, but year over year, we're seeing an increase in fatal crashes on our streets. So we're looking at that information and thinking, what are the infrastructure investments as part of an overall strategy that we can make to make sure that we are enhancing safety and using the best practices to improve safe travel for all users of the system. So drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, and everyone else. And what we've been hearing through this effort and through a number of city efforts and regional efforts is a growing demand for more balanced travel options. As again, many of you are well aware, this is a city that grew up around the private automobile. But maybe that doesn't work for everybody anymore. So we're starting to hear that there are people who want to have other safe, reliable, and convenient travel options. So we need to think about what are the investments that we make in our system to make that possible. And part of it is kind of unengineering some of our practices of the past, and also looking at where we can kind of build in different types of networks for different user groups. And more than just that, accommodating different travel choices, we also need to be thinking about making sure that for people who don't necessarily have as many choices because of the burden of the cost of private automobile ownership, that we are making equitable investments, thinking about where the users of the system are going to be more likely to be reliant on the bike network, on sidewalks, and on a reliable public transportation system. So all of that is really tied up in this plan. It is a comprehensive multimodal plan. So when we put all of that together, our main challenge through Move Tucson, and I would pose your main challenge because we're trying to listen to you, is how do we make the most efficient use of our limited street space, working with the infrastructure that we have and the budget we have to accommodate these changes, to think about balancing the needs of the system, balancing the different user groups, and addressing the emerging technology. Where we are right now is that our streets today in the city of Tucson really reflect the decisions that were made in the past. We grew up in the age of the automobile, and our city reflects that. And a lot of the projects that we're still pursuing to this day kind of evolved in were conceived 15, 10, 20 years ago, but are just now through the planning and design process and the funding process coming to construction. What Move Tucson is really an opportunity for us to re-envision our transportation, to rethink the paradigm here in Tucson, or maybe to reaffirm it. I guess that's yet to be determined depending on what we hear back from the public, to ultimately create the city that we want for the future, that reflects our values and that reflects our potential as a community. So what is the process? This is ever evolving at this point. I'll be perfectly honest with you. So when we launched in the fall of 2019 in October, we envisioned this to be about a 15-month process, 13 to 15 months, wrapping up in December of 2020. So we began in October with some targeted stakeholder interviews and doing kind of that underlying conditions analysis, looking at the existing conditions of the data of the system with the data that we had available to get basically an understanding of the groundwork, where we are right now and what some of our critical needs are. We launched in February of 2020 with a public event where we really turned from doing that background kind of pre-planning work to a public-facing effort. Opening up a community survey, our website, having a kickoff event at the Fox Theater. Mayor Romero spoke, our out-of-town consultant project team spoke. And we were looking to wrap that up in about summer of 2020, probably about now or maybe a month or two ago. And the purpose of this first phase was really to gather community input, to hear from all of you, to help shape the plan, and also do our data analysis. Where we are right now is that we have not been able to do the level of community engagement that we would have hoped at this point. So while we, on this timeline, are saying summer of 2020, where we are right now is that we are pretty much in a holding pattern, continuing to engage, and as we look how to manage this process virtually for the time being, seeing how we can expand participation. Because this is going to be the City of Tucson's master transportation plan, we want to make sure that we do it right and take the time necessary to make sure that we're hearing from all members of the community and a variety of voices, and making sure particularly we're hearing from voices in parts of our city that we've traditionally had a hard time engaging with. So that's what we're focusing on right now. So I'm not going to give you a hard deadline for kind of when this first phase public engagement period ends. We're going to go and continue to evaluate until we feel comfortable that we've heard a lot from people. So we're going to continue to push, try to get out to community events as best we can, and work with the options we have available to us presently. Once we do wrap that up, maybe later in the summer, maybe into the fall, we're going to look at exploring some different scenarios, exploring the trade-offs of different investment options, and developing some recommendations out of those based on the community input and the data analysis we've heard. At that point, we'll come back to the public and have a review of the initial findings of this effort, likely summer, fall 2020, maybe a little bit beyond, depending on what our timeline's looking like at that time. And then ultimately, we're going to finalize a project list, have clearly defined and actual projects, and an implementation kind of phasing sequencing plan that we'll bring out at the end of this to mayor and council ultimately for approval. Initially, we're looking at December 2020. We're quite comfortable at this point pushing it into the winter of 21 or even spring of 2021, depending on when we're able to safely get back out and engage with people in the community face to face. At this point, we're not holding our breath that will be anytime soon. So how is the plan going to be used? We're setting Move Tucson up to really address the mobility challenges that we face as a city and as a region, recognizing that Tucson is really the primary kind of travel market of the region and home to a lot of the jobs. So, we recognize that a lot of the commuter activities coming into the city during the day. So we have kind of that regional responsibility as well as our city responsibility. And we need to think seriously about how we balance our competing demands on our transportation system. So this is really front and center. So we're recognizing that we want to provide transportation choices to the traveling public that really reflects what we're hearing back from people. But we recognize that we probably can't meet the needs of all users to the same degree on all parts of our network. So we're trying to think about it in more of a network approach, recognizing that some of our facilities, some of our streets might be better positioned to support crosstown travel, freight movement, while still accommodating comfortably and safely as best we can, pedestrians and bicyclists safely. And then also looking at maybe those other streets that would be more appropriate for where we are going to prioritize bicycle, pedestrian transit, or other user groups, recognizing that on those streets that travel times and level of service for automobiles is not a really much of a consideration in terms of identifying the performance outcomes that we're looking at for our network. So we're thinking through what those different demands would be, how we allocate space within our right-of-way, and how that influences kind of those network level decisions in terms of what those kind of key sub-networks are. And sub-networks might be something like the bike boulevard network, or the frequent transit network, or the regionally significant corridors network, which would be more about moving people across town. And how do those all fit together in a way that makes sense, in a way that's safe? And it is a comprehensive transportation plan, so it's covering all modes of travel. So we're thinking about bicyclists and pedestrians and transit users and delivery vehicles, emerging technologies, as well as automobiles, and looking at how those pieces all fit together. In addition to that, we're also looking at the underlying infrastructure, the condition of the roadways, where there are opportunities for green infrastructure installations. For example, if there are policy changes that need to support that, how utilities and green infrastructure, the interplay of that within our public rights of way. So kind of everything's on the table. This is really our first broad, comprehensive transportation plan specifically for the city of Tucson that's looking at all of these components. And everything we're doing is being informed by the data. So as I mentioned, we kicked off this process with doing some of that pre-planning work, identifying the performance of the underlying network. So we're done a safety assessment, and that's still evolving, but we're identifying locations, segments, and intersections where we have a disproportionate share of crashes and serious injuries and fatalities. We're also looking at that in terms of where we have a disproportionate share or concentration of crashes and fatalities that affect bicyclists and pedestrians and other vulnerable user groups. Anyway, we're doing an equity analysis. So as I mentioned, we're looking at where travel choices might be more limited, where we have concentrations of low-income residents who would be more dependent on having safe and high-quality bicycle, sidewalk, and transit service. And how does that come into play as we look at ultimately coming up with a project prioritization scheme that's going to inform the projects that are being recommended out of this process. We're assessing the condition of existing facilities. So we're looking at the performance and age of our traffic signals, of our pavement condition, where our sidewalks are missing, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're doing a street network analysis, basically doing your traditional kind of bottleneck analysis, looking at what current traffic volumes are, what projected traffic volumes are, and where we're anticipating kind of future congestion. But what we're also doing in this process, which I think is kind of exciting and interesting, is we're looking at that kind of in the inverse as well. We're done an initial analysis and seen that we have significant excess capacity on a lot of our roadways in Tucson. And this is a major opportunity as we think of projects and investments that would allow us to reallocate space within those rights of way, because we don't need to hold on to that excess capacity if we're projecting 30, 40, 50 years down the road, that those traffic volumes aren't increasing too substantially. Traditionally, when we've done these things, we would just look at the bottlenecks and say, okay, well, here we see traffic volumes increasing. This might be an area for consideration for capacity expansion on this roadway. But now we're also looking at where we have overextended ourselves in the past and seen what opportunities that might present, particularly where a lot of the infrastructure in those locations may be deficient or unsafe in some manner, so they may allow us to reallocate space to transit lanes or wider, safer, kind of modern bike facilities that go beyond just a white stripe on the side of the road and looking at protected bike facilities or wider sidewalks or what have you. And everything we're doing is shaped by the community, and that's why we're kind of putting this on pause and trying to do more listening with the tools that we have available to us. The data, they kind of tell us the existing conditions, but they don't necessarily tell us what the right answers are. So the purpose of going out to the community is really to shape the interpretation of that data so that we have a better sense of what the right answers are for Tucson in terms of what do we do with this information and what do we prioritize in terms of our limited transportation budgets over the coming 20 years. So as we initiated this process, what we really wanted to do was take a kind of we come to you approach. So traditionally, as we've done these types of things, we would set up a web page, maybe have a social media presence, and then have a couple of public meetings and have people come out and tell us their thoughts. What we initially intended to do was then see where we could engage with people as they go about their daily business. So before the stay-at-home order, what we were trying to attempt was to make sure that we were out at bus stations, that we were at community meetings that were pre-existing, getting on agendas, that we were setting up tables at community events, and just trying to get in front of people as they go about their daily business. So we're not able to do that, obviously, currently, but we're trying to find some way of paralleling it in the online, in the virtual universe. One of the cool things I think that we're doing with this process is we have established a street ambassador program. And what the street ambassador program is they are people who volunteered, who are interested in working in this space, who are receiving a small stipend basically because they represent communities or have strong connections within communities and neighborhoods that we've traditionally struggled to engage in our planning processes, to really be a trusted face and kind of allow us to put additional resources behind engagement efforts in those parts of the city. They haven't been able to engage their neighbors in person at the current moment, but they have been helping us come up with some online strategies. They've been reaching out to their friends and family through social media, online, through email. They've been calling folks. And hopefully just as soon as we can, we'll start to work with them and then get back out into face-to-face meetings. Where we are right now is we've got a number of requests into grocery stores and other public spaces in some target zip codes that we've identified through the first phase of engagement, to do some tabling, to offer some rewards for people as they participate in this process. So we've had about 2,800 people take the survey to date, and we've done a first pass and really seen where those gaps are. So where we are right now is we want to take the next month or two to really focus on filling in those gaps and putting more of our resources into engaging people in those 5, 6, 7 zip codes within the city where we haven't seen the level of participation that we'd like. So our participation pool is not representative of the city of Tucson, and we're well aware of that, and we're looking at strategies to fill that gap. So where that puts us is that we're doing that technical analysis, as I mentioned. We're having the community input as it fills out, really shape the interpretation of that data, put meaning to it, and then ultimately use that to inform a common vision for transportation, which at the end of this process will result in a specific list of transportation projects and funding priorities for the department that we can pursue over the next 20 plus years. So when I talk about transportation projects, this could be everything from maybe kind of pots of different types of projects. So categories of, say, we want to fund X number of bike hawks for safe crossings at bike boulevards. We're not going to identify those right now, but we know we're going to set some funding aside for that as a priority. And it would also be specific potential corridor projects, which doesn't necessarily have to be, and I would expect probably won't be, a significant number of like widenings or capacity expansion, but it might be modernization type projects where we say, okay, this corridor has a number of deficiencies. We can go in there and make kind of full-scale improvements to it to hit all of these areas, including making sure the sidewalks are better, making sure the pavement's there, doing drainage work, incorporating landscaping and green infrastructure, enhancing the transit service, upgrading the traffic signal so operationally it flows better. So what we need then is basically we're out asking people to help us move Tucson, to make sense of this process, to give us your input so that we can stop giving these presentations in such vague terms and come back to you and say, hey, we've heard you. Here are the priorities that we've heard from the community so far, because I can't say that tonight. And here's maybe a preliminary list of projects. So maybe next time you see me, I can have some of those results. But first, we need to hear from you and have, get that participation. So as we kind of work through this virtual world, every way of participating in this effort right now is available at movetucson.org. We're still hosting an online survey. It's about a 15-minute survey that just provides, asks questions about kind of big picture priorities for our transportation system in terms of, better sidewalks, safer crossings, better pavement condition, kind of what's your big picture priorities. And then we're also hosting an interactive map, which you can translate those big picture priorities into specific either problem areas or opportunity areas in the city. So it shows a map of the city of Tucson, and you can identify specific roadways, intersections, crosswalks, locations where you would like to see new investments in transportations. And it can be as small as a traffic signal or as big as we've got some streetcars that are going to the Desert Museum on there. Somebody's put a rail connection to Los Angeles. There's a couple crosstown freeways that are showing up. So completely flexible, up to you, whatever you would like to add, and you can put as much or as little as you want on the map. So it's a much more kind of flexible way of participating, which I think is pretty exciting. if I can bring up one more thing, I can show you just the online map. See if I can get this right. Is that showing up?
Not yet. You might need to choose a new tab if you chose to cast your tab before.
Okay. Chrome wants to share.
You probably need to present now again. Click present now again.
Yeah, it says I'm trying to share, but the share is grayed out, so I don't know why it won't let me do that. But regardless, we can move on without it. Basically, if you know how to use a Google map, for example, or something along those lines, you should be able to work through the Move Tucson map. Basically, you can go in there, you can identify an intersection, a street, and you can place a point or a line on the map and tell us what's important to you in terms of investments in that location. You can also comment on other people's project ideas or like or dislike their project ideas. So it's very flexible, it supports a lot of interaction, and there's really no restrictions or limitations on the types of ideas that we'll take through that platform. If you have trouble kind of navigating it, there's also an option if you're using a screen reader, or if you aren't comfortable using the map interface, there's a way you can log in and just say, post a general comment, we'll take it, we'll add it to the map as well. And there's also a couple of videos that will step you through step by step how to place comments on the video, on the map.
Patrick, would you like me to try presenting the map, and maybe you can just talk through some of the things you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, sure, if you want to.
Yeah, let's give that a shot. Let me do that. So, because yeah, it's probably a little helpful. I think it's helpful to see that. So I think this should be the right tab. All right. Hopefully you will be seeing that shortly. Are you seeing the Move Tucson splash screen right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yeah, so this would be the starting point.
Exactly. So what we have here is basically gives you an overview of what it is. And if this just, you access this through Move Tucson, it says public input map. If you are using a screen reader or, again, don't like to use the map, you can click where it says click here above the public input map. So if you want to click on the public input map, so you should see something that looks similar to this, just a blank map of the city of Tucson. Can you click show comments up on the top tab there? And that's everybody else who has used this map or put a project idea down at some point. So you can click on any of those, see what your fellow residents are saying. You can like, you can dislike. So this intersection needs a left turn lane. You can view or add another comment. And the more you zoom in, more they might separate. So there's two types of projects on the map. Any of them that are in little squares with the little icons are point projects. So those are projects that people have said, at this specific location, there's something right here that I want to see addressed. Either I'd like something new there, whatever's there isn't working, I'd like to change it. And then the dashed lines are basically corridor projects. They are two-dimensional. They cover some distance. So if you look over on that left-hand pane there in the panel, you can see where you can add a point or you can add a line. So you want to click add a point. And you just drop something wherever you want it. There you go. Then you have the option of putting your name down. You can put in your zip code. We are asking for zip code because we're just trying to track who is participating. You can have to select what type of project this is or what type of point you're adding. It's walking idea, biking, freight, motor vehicle, and then you can add your comment. And then, then you hit send. And I will say if you have more immediate needs, we've also put the link for T.concerns. So this really isn't the place to put you need a pothole filled or a tree trimmed, because you're getting that then funneled into our long-range transportation plan. So we might get there in 20 years if you put it in here. So you can go directly to TDOT concerns, get that into the customer service representatives, and we'll get a team out in the next couple of weeks to address those more immediate concerns. So that's...
Is that off the main webpage, or is that like off the Contact Us tab?
So if you hit Add a Point,
okay,
back there, pop out. Yeah, you can just drop that wherever. If you scroll down.
Okay, there we go.
A note on maintenance. If you have immediate maintenance needs, you can let us know at TDOT concerns or at that number. And then we'll get that routed in so that we can get a crew out there in the next couple of weeks. So I guess the point of this is to kind of big picture projects, not necessarily those little, the smaller kind of maintenance needs that are more immediate. So this is what we're featuring right now, and we're really encouraging people to go there and put as much on the project map as they want to, as you feel comfortable with. Things that are citywide or maybe more specific to your neighborhood. And that's all I have for you this evening about Move Tucson. I'm happy to take some questions, discussion.
Okay, and before we open up to people asking questions, there were a couple that showed up in the chat while you were giving the presentation, so I'll just read those and then we'll let everybody else ask their questions after that. So Robin asked if Imagine Tucson is a part of Move Tucson. It was something that a similar process that occurred a few years ago, and as part of it, one of the requests was asking for the trolley to go down Broadway.
That's a great question. Thank you, Robin. And actually, I was on staff at Imagine Greater Tucson, so I'm intimately familiar with that process. That's where I cut my first planning teeth, in fact, in the city of Tucson. So some of those concepts continue to exist primarily through Plan Tucson and informing the land uses that we are using to do our future travel demand estimates. So it kind of gets a little messy there, but basically Imagine Greater Tucson made a projection out into the future of different types of landforms and looking at more compact development on some of our key corridors in the city of Tucson, which is then reflected then into Plan Tucson, which then we are consuming to model future travel growth, essentially, and what those different travel patterns would look like. The high capacity transit corridors that we're looking at, and none of these have been predetermined, are actually coming from the long range regional transit plan, which has identified 3 potential corridors and 2 technologies. So they're looking at either bus rapid transit or streetcar on Broadway, something south to the airport, and something north to basically the Tucson Mall, the Tohono Tadai Transit Center area. And those projects were tested based on 11 that had been out in the ether for a while, and those were deemed the most feasible routes. So those will be something we'll look at as we look at investment priorities. So that was really kind of a study, but those are unfunded. So if we wanted to pursue funding, we would want to put them into Move Tucson. Sorry if that was a very convoluted answer.
I don't know, Robin, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, another question we had, Paula asked, are you looking for input just from city residents or from county residents as well? Will the plan include impacts outside city limits?
So the recommendations or whatever projects that we'd be carrying this project are going to be within the city of Tucson, our infrastructure that we control. However, we are taking comments and we're seeking participation from anybody who commutes into the city, who comes into the city for entertainment, or kind of has an opinion about transportation in the city of Tucson. That will be reflected in the demographic questions, which is why we're asking it in the zip code, so we can actually do an analysis to see if people's relationship with our transportation system affects kind of their responses to those questions. We've done a preliminary pass to see if there's a difference between people who reside in the city, for example, versus people who commute into the city in terms of their priorities.
Okay, and Rochelle asked if there's a plan to expand the streetcar to Pima Community College downtown.
I would have to check the routes. I know there is a north-south corridor considered in the long-range regional transit plan, and I believe it goes up Stone, but I would have to double-check that. But in that vicinity, ultimately terminating at Tahona to Die. It was either up Stone or Oracle, and I think, you know, nothing has been totally determined with that yet. Actually, we did submit a grant to the FTA a couple months ago, looking at an equitable transit-oriented development proposal, looking at basically kind of a north-south spine for high-capacity transit investments, and seeing what types of land, how the land use, basically getting money to plan for supportive land uses along those corridors. And it was a quarter or a half mile within those routes, and certainly Pima Community College was in that kind of buffer area where we'd be looking. I don't believe that's been announced yet if we receive that grant, but it's certainly an area that we're looking.
Yeah, and it'd be great to see that get expanded, because right now it doesn't go quite far enough.
Yeah.
Stuart asked a question. He says that key thinkers in sustainability assert that one of the key roots of our environmental health problems is the implicit expectation that we can grow forever in population and in resource consumption. Does Move Tucson share this premise? How will the project make explicit the policy and practical consequences of this premise, which I would assume that, you know, we're not going to try and grow our infrastructure forever?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's been a wake-up call for us, I think, in this profession in the last few years, because one of our guiding assumptions had always been kind of, we have to be reacting to growth because this has been a high growth community for the last 15, 20 years. Since the Great Recession, we've seen 0 to 0.5% growth rate. So it's really flattened and stabilized, and has been affecting our projections considerably. So I think it's put us in a good opportunity within the city that we don't necessarily feel like we have to be chasing roadway capacity in quite the same way we did in the past, and make that one of the determining considerations when identifying future project needs. So I think a couple things are happening is that we're looking more at network efficiencies and expanding choices more so than preparing for growth. Whereas historically, I think we spent a lot of time preparing for growth and saying we got to widen a number of these roadways.
Okay, great. And one more question. Other cities have looked at similar plans for future projects. What are the more common projects winning public support? Bike lanes, pedestrian corridors, additional transit, etc.
Yeah, as of right now, I can't say. We haven't done the analysis of the comments that have been coming in on the public input map. We're seeing a lot of support for. I've seen a lot of bike project ideas on there, a lot of crosswalk ideas, some big transit ideas. So I guess I don't want to bias it because I might be looking for certain things as I just kind of peruse people's input. So it's hard for me to say at this point. Everything's still kind of on the table, and that's what we'll be looking at into the next phase. I do anticipate that we will be hearing a kind of more balanced call instead of just, again, kind of addressing congestion as our primary concern, particularly in kind of light and context of the City of Tucson's Complete Streets policy that passed last year, and making sure that we are kind of expanding our thinking about what we're trying to do with our transportation investments.
That's great. Yeah, we actually did have a program about the Complete Streets plan as well a little while ago, and I'm really happy to see that did pass, because I think that's going to have a very positive impact on the City of Tucson. That's everything we've got in the chat, so if anyone would like to unmute their mic and ask a question that they didn't get a chance to ask in the chat, this would be the time to do it.
And Dan, if I may just add one thing, is I will say that our new street design guide is actually up on our Complete Streets website right now. Looking at kind of what the new proposed cross sections and investment strategies would look like in our roadways in light of the Complete Streets Design Guidelines. So we'll be updating all of our city policies and our major streets and routes plan, and a lot of those things that are guiding kind of the design of our roadways.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out and add it as a note on our webpage and on Facebook. I appreciate that.
Barbara, I have a question.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I may have missed this, but are you going to be working on electric vehicle charging stations throughout the city?
I think it's something that we should look at. I can't say as to whether we will be looking at that independent of kind of the Move Tucson initiative, but one of the people who are on our project team from Alta Planning and Design, who is a national planning firm, is actually their organization leader or their company leader in kind of curbside management emerging technologies. That's a very vague answer. I think it's a great suggestion, and it's something that I will take note of.
Thank you.
Well, I've got a question, Patrick.
Yeah.
The PEMA Association of Governments says we're drive 10 billion miles a year and are $15 billion short on the amount of money required to do everything in RMAP, the long-term plan.
Mm-hmm.
What's the city's involvement? Not involvement. What part of that shortfall is city projects? Do you have any idea?
That's a good question. So where that number comes from is basically it's everything that was submitted as the potential universe of projects in the last RMAP call for projects, and then estimating the revenue forecast out until 2045 and just calculating the difference between those two things. Typically, I would say the city probably represents about 50 to 60% of the projects that were in the PEG project database. But what we're trying to do is with Move Tucson is essentially make that a clean slate. So a lot of the projects that the city has been sponsoring through the regional RMAP process have been kind of sitting in that database since 1998 in some cases, 2003 in some cases, some of them more recent. But there's never really been a wholesale attempt on the city's behalf to just say, we're not really sure if these are the projects that we want to support anymore. There's been a lot of turnover, a lot of change in, I think, our philosophy in transportation in the city. So Move Tucson is really our opportunity to replace that project list within the RMAP, essentially. So I can give you a better answer to that question after this process is over, because what we'll ultimately do is be developing our own new kind of universe of project for the city of Tucson. Some of those are going to then go into the future RMAPs and inform the RMAP updates, and they will also be what the city is submitting to the RTA continuation plan, or the RTA to RTA Next, they're calling it.
So that means the city's capital improvements programs are going to change substantially. Does that include the current 5-year plan?
No, and actually, thank you for asking that. No, we are locked into basically fulfilling what is in the current RTA plan by the will of the voters, although there is a little bit of space to redefine what those projects look like when they go to construction. And I think we're being encouraged to look more creatively at them because of the funding shortfalls with the RTA as well, and kind of the maybe not being able to build to quite the extent that we originally anticipated. But no, that's a great question. So yeah, the next pretty much 5 years are largely locked in through the RTA. Most of our capital improvements are RTA projects, other than some small like bike hawks, some Prop 407 type projects, which are also voter approved that we're pursuing. Although Prop 407 is the Bike Boulevard Master Plan, or the Bike Boulevard Parks and Connection Bond. So we're building a lot of the bike boulevards to connect to the parks, and those are largely predetermined as well.
Okay.
So that's the other kind of big piece that's hanging out over this, is that if you're not familiar with it, the Regional Transportation Authority is currently in early stages of their process to look at the next 20-year RTA plan. they've got a call to projects out to the jurisdictions right now. So we're doing Move Tucson in anticipation of developing our project list to submit to the RTA to have that regional fund source to fulfill some of these. But there's a lot of flexibility in that, and that we can really define for ourselves what our project list is going to look like for the future RTA, not for the current one. That's pretty well determined.
Okay, and along those same lines, because I'm sure you never get asked any funding questions when you do one of these things, Colin also asked, how are we going to get funding for actually getting the project goals realized once this process is completed?
Yeah, that's great. So we're looking at taking this as basically making this a prioritized list of projects. And we have our typical fund sources. So we have our state shared revenues that we receive from the gas tax. We receive some regional dollars through the PEG RTA, potentially future RTA dollars, which we'd be submitting to that. So depending on that funding level, we can do some of these or more of these, but we do have our capital budget as transportation that we control largely through the gas tax. That said, there's the RTA would be a big chunk. There's also discussion of potentially looking at future city bonds, or looking at city-controlled revenue to pursue some of these projects if there's an appetite for it. So right now we've got Prop 101, Prop 407, and Prop 409, which all passed the voters successfully. Some of those are going to be sunsetting, already have. 101 and 409 being the pavement projects, and then 407 being the bike boulevards. So that could be a possibility down the road. Also, there's always federal grant opportunities and things out there. If we have that project list, then we'll be able to better pursue and position ourselves for those opportunities.
I'm wondering, excuse me, this is Dwayne Ediger. I'm on the Sustainable Tucson board, and renewable energy is sort of my area of focus. I wonder if I could expand a little bit on Barbara Warren's question, a little bit more commentary and inviting you to consider a little more deeply about the fact that in Southern Arizona, transportation is right at the top of greenhouse gas emission sources together with electricity generation. And if we can take advantage of our really inexpensive and abundant solar resource and act quickly in order to meet the Paris goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, limit things to that, we've got to act pretty fast if we're really honestly going to try to do that. And electrifying transportation is kind of a low-hanging fruit there. So I think it's worth putting a little more thought in this, what I see as a pretty long-term planning exercise at letting the city, both in terms of its facilities and policies, model what really works best. And I'm going to take as an example your street network analysis, that graph that showed how the traffic goes up in the morning and down all day long from about 9 to 4, which is peak solar production time when all these cars are parked at their workplaces. And then, of course, goes back up again when people go home. If the city could model for its employees and for people who come to get city services at city facilities, charging of cars during this daytime hours when the solar energy is abundant, we could go a long way in doing our part for our region to meet that goal. And I just think that given, the few years, really, honestly, that we have to have a chance at making that goal, this might have to be a serious priority in the short term.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. And I think it's something we do need to look at. We have had a little bit of success recently. We just received a second federal grant to help begin the process of electrifying our buses. So I think we can get like 6 or 7 new Suntran buses through a federal grant we just received. Part of this too, I think, is discussion through potentially Plan Tucson as they kick off next year, and looking at some of the development expectations, right, or requirements as people are developing their lots and having a standard for, X number of electric charging stations per parking spaces, for example, could be something that we could put in our development code.
And I would just add one more thing, that this wouldn't necessarily, on the short term, it would require investment, but in the long term, it could be something that would be revenue neutral, because you could charge a reasonable rate for the energy to charge cars and make a return on that investment.
I wonder if has anybody talked about to TEP about if they have any programs to expand or install electric charging stations. I really don't know. I'm just curious. You guys are closer to it.
They have thought about it, but in terms of programs, I don't think there's much there yet. So the city can take the lead on this one. Go for it.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
And Richard did put a question in the comments. He said, we've heard about connecting the bicycle boulevards. However, the paving of many of the bicycle boulevards is terrible. I can attest to that as well. Treat Avenue between Broadway and Speedway, 3rd between Tucson and Country Club, 9th between Euclid and 4th, and the list goes on. When can we get our bicycle boulevards properly paved?
Excellent question, and I will say I've been on the Prop 407 outreach at the parks over in the last fall, and it was the #1 comment and question we received. It was like, the traffic circles and the speed humps are lovely, that's great, but just fix the pavement, please. So I think right now what we would be looking at, they're exploring some kind of just topical fixes if they can do it, but essentially, if we go out for another pavement bond, I think that would be the place to fix those. Right now, there's a money that's kind of set aside for the neighborhoods, and one of the discussions would be prioritizing the bike boulevards more so than specific neighborhoods. But that's a decision that has to be made, I think, through those bond committees or however that's packaged. But absolutely, I ride them too, and they've rattled my teeth. I understand. I'm sympathetic.
Patrick, this is Stuart again.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the enormous space we have in our streets and how recently we've been able to use them more as places of being neighbors versus places to get through. Do you have any models in other cities where the neighbors have become more neighborly by diverting or altering traffic flows, and/or do we have anything happening in Tucson itself that would be a good model to expand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that a lot of cities have been looking at a slow streets program in response to coronavirus. Oakland was a leader in this. A couple of the other more compact cities have looked at it, where people weren't able to safely go to parks. They had high density situations, so they came up with strategies for slowing traffic down and essentially making the streets kind of shared community spaces. Mayor and council last week, 2 weeks ago, actually looked at their kind of CARES Act budget, and they identified $1.4 million for a slow streets program in the city of Tucson. So that will be something that will, assuming that passes, I think it has to get federal approval at this point, but we'll look to see how that can be implemented. We have done a couple pilots. We did a pilot on 4th Ave, north of Speedway, and now we've moved it to Liberty. I forget what the second street is. Basically putting up some, local access only or local traffic only barricades and encouraging slower travel and having people kind of use the street in a more neighborly way, basically encouraging people to be walking, biking, talking to their neighbors, and kind of making the car the second user of that facility. There is a street type, I think it came out of the Netherlands, called like a Woonerf or Woonerf, and it's a shared street model. Basically, everybody is in the same space. There's no sidewalks or bike lanes, and everybody just coexists. Cars can go on it, but the expectation is the car is going to go 5 miles per hour because the pedestrians and bicyclists have the right of way. think it's WOONERF.
Yeah, as you talk, I begin to realize we do have a few little models. One would be, at least in that direction, is on Scott Street or Scott Avenue going up towards the temple. That's a very calm street.
Yeah.
You can't quite go out and play, catch there, but you can cross very safely, and it's a very walkable set of blocks.
Yeah, that's a great street, and I think a model for kind of the complete streets as well, that you've got the green infrastructure features in there. It's slow, it's attractive. And some of the streets in the older barrios in the city, I think, are great examples because they're very narrow. They're 18 feet instead of our typical 35 to 40 feet. They might be curbless. The cars kind of pull off into the easements, and everyone just by necessity kind of operates on the street. And if you're driving down there, you don't expect to be driving fast, as opposed to some of our neighborhood streets, which encourage high speeds, which is why then we have to go back and put in speed humps and traffic circles because they're 36 to 40 feet wide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to get to be able to say. Am I listened to? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bettina.
There isn't anybody moderating.
Yep.
Okay,
Now go ahead.
So far, all the talk seems to be about cars and bikes. I hear nothing much about buses. And I know the buses in Tucson are close to non-existent. They don't work very well. We live at McGee and Oracle. It's impossible to use them where we are. But if you don't have buses, people don't use buses. And they don't even have ability to give you feedback on what would be good because they never tried to use a bus. Now, we're from Montreal. We're here in Montreal right now. And
we're snowbirds.
Yeah. We have a free museums day, and free buses are tied to that. And then people have an incentive to, as they did, they had initially, I think with your tramway, they had some free time and so on. And so people took advantage of that. And once they've used the buses a bit, then they can give you feedback, but you're not going to get any, if you're relying on feedback, you're not getting feedback on buses because people don't use the buses and they don't know where the gaps are and where the problems are. And I think the initial thing I saw on the screen was that buses are the best way of cutting down on pollution and so on. And so that's where the focus should be, it seems to me. You really want to cut down on pollution, which is a big thing for sustainable Tucson. That's where we've got to make a push.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I appreciate that. And I apologize if I neglected to mention buses. So that's certainly, transit is certainly a consideration in this planning effort. One of the things that we're looking to build on is what we're calling the frequent transit network. If you guys are familiar with that at all, we try to promote it. I don't know how widely bus promotions get out there, to your point. But basically, we just worked with Association of Governments to do a long-range regional transportation plan, regional public transit plan, and have identified a network of potential corridors that have higher ridership because of the underlying demographics. The land uses would be supportive of it. And the concept is really investing to make sure that those buses have a higher frequency, are more reliable, are more predictable, because they're going to perform better when people know that they can step out their front door and they're going to have a short wait to a bus. The cost of that is if you're going to be investing in kind of a core network of frequency, you're going to have to sacrifice some coverage because running a broader network is going to have a cost associated with it. It's much more expensive. So the decision was really made to focus on kind of that core network where the land uses are supportive. The first improvements that are going to be coming out of that are really building a better grid system on the south side. So because the way the interstates kind of bisect the south side and that Y happens where the interchange of I-10 and I-19, there hasn't been a very strong network of a bus service down there. Traditionally, everything kind of ran into Laos and then ran back out, which is a really inefficient way to run bus system. So now we're looking at building that grid so things are always intersecting and it's more predictable and more reliable. So that's something that there's a lot of work that was done on that, and we want to roll that into Move Tucson because they spent a year and a half largely looking at the transit system, and that focus I think can really benefit this effort. What they didn't ultimately identify were priorities for high capacity transit. So they've identified those 3 corridors and 6 technologies that I mentioned, north, south, and Broadway, but those haven't been prioritized. So Move Tucson is an opportunity to prioritize the high capacity transit component of that, but we do want to pursue the frequent transit network and improve the reliability of the bus service.
I agree with her that this is Jana, that we need to have better bus service, and not enough people are riding it. And one of the ways to have more people ride it is to make it more comfortable. It's really hot and there's not enough shade at the bus stops, especially after you guys changed all those places where the buses pull in, and they lost a lot of trees and a lot of shade, and even just like the cleanliness of the bus stops, that a lot of bus stops don't have adequate trash cans or trash pickup, and so they get overflowing there. And so I was wondering what you're going to do to make the ride more pleasant. Are you going to do any more shade or?
No, that's a great question. So we'll continue to look for locations, I think, to expand the use of the shelters. Certainly, as we get requests, as we do corridor projects, we make sure that we're installing the shelters. I think we do need to look at improving shade and natural shade at the bus stops to make it more comfortable. We have had kind of an ongoing challenge with our contractor who does the maintenance and the cleaning of the bus shelters. So we continue to kind of hound them to make sure that they're on that. But if there are specific locations, please call that into TDOT Concerns or email at TDOT Concerns, and we'll get a team out there to make sure that they get cleaned up. But yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's got to be destination to destination or pick up to end that trip to make it appealing to people to use it. I think it's something that we've heard a lot is why don't you use the bus when we ask that question in our survey, for example. Number one typically is just that it takes 2 to 3 times as longer to get to your destination as a private automobile, but then people feel uncomfortable or ultimately unsafe on the bus as well.
But also, if like you made the buses more reliable, like with more time stops at the big bus stations, so people knew when they were coming, and also, Dan, isn't there some kind of app that could tell you exactly when the bus is coming so that people don't have to sit out there in the sun as often?
Yeah, and that's actually one thing that I'm not sure why Suntran didn't do it. They finally put in the GTRS, which is the data format for transit. They finally put that in and provided the authority to Google, for example, to use that for Google Maps. But then they never gave the real-time data, and I know they have the real-time data. So yeah, it would be really nice to be able to, just look at your map app and say, hey, the next bus is going to be at the intersection near me in 5 minutes. I can go catch it.
Yeah, and I know you can find it on a desktop, but I'm not sure if it translates over to the phone. Yeah,
that's pretty funny. It's true for the streetcar. You can get real time for the streetcar, but only on desktop, which is about the most useless thing you can have.
You just got to check at home and run out there quickly. But that is one of the things that we want to do with the frequent transit network. So the consultant we had in town to help us develop that has come up with this concept that basically that 15-minute headway is that when you don't necessarily have to be checking the time to make sure that there's going to be a bus there, because typically you're going to be waiting 7 to 8 minutes every time at that stop if you've got a 15-minute service at that location. Where you have 30-minute service, it becomes far more important that you are checking the arrival times.
Or if it's really hot outside, or if it's raining.
Yeah,
Can
absolutely.
I add to the point that Bettina made a couple of minutes ago about buses? I tried an adventure last year in the spring going from the airport to the lower part of Oro Valley. and it took me 2.5 hours, including a 1 hour walk from Ina, where the bus routes end. And that was with an immediate across the platform transfer downtown. But I took this side trip to Laos to downtown to the restaurant place up in the north end on the same bus, which then went up Oracle and didn't go anywhere near our house. And of course there are no taxis, so it was a nice hike with the suitcase. 2.5 hours. It's a 25-minute drive. That's the challenge, to try to cut out those long stops at places like Laos.
Yeah.
Well, with regard to schedule, I don't even know because I don't use the bus there.
We can't use it where we live.
But are they not posted when the bus comes on each bus stop? It should have the times posted.
They
there.
are not, actually. I can answer that one. They're not
All right,
posted at any of the
because
stops.
that really helps. I mean, people, a lot of people who use the bus don't use computers a lot or have good Wi-Fi service and so on. So
And that would and that would save on paper, because they print up all those paper versions of the schedule that change. I don't know why they have to change all the time. Why don't they just keep pretty much consistent? But if you put it at the bus stops like you suggested, you could save all that paper from ending up in the landfill.
Right.
Or recycled.
If it's their stop, they're going to remember. They're going to come by and say, "Oh, look, I should come at 10:30." You know.
Good idea.
On behalf of the paper schedules, I carry that bus schedule with me wherever I go, and sometimes I'll decide when to leave school based on what that schedule says. So that plus the bus drivers are pretty good about honoring the times when they're supposed to be at particular points. There's anywhere from 6 to 8 points on their route, which ideally we'd have even more, but it's good the way it's laid out, actually. And most bus drivers, they all try really hard. Sometimes things happen that slow them down.
That would be a good way of getting people to use the bus a little more, is just to have a mailing. The bus passes your house, it stops there at these times, such and such a number bus. It's one way for you to get downtown and not pay for parking. And just send it out as a flyer once or twice a year.
Yeah, that's a good thought. And Rochelle had a thought as well about the shade structures at the bus stops, which I've noticed myself. They're not really installed properly in relation to sun angles, which makes them pretty worthless. And actually, they're so narrow, and this is the thing I've noticed, that if it's raining, there's really nowhere to stand because you're going to get wet no matter where you're standing, because they're not actually protecting you from the elements.
Yes.
Are there seats in your bus stops?
There are, but yeah, the overhangs are very small. They have these curved overhangs, and they don't really actually protect you from the sun a lot of the time, or from rain.
They don't have a solar panel on top? They should have a solar
They should.
panel.
Yeah, they don't.
But they have really cool designed ones. I want to say they're on a grant. I mean, they're aesthetically, they look amazing, but they're not doing anything. And it drives me insane to see that.
Yeah, and you scorch your bottom sitting on those because
Take your pillow.
Dan? I'm curious. I mentioned 10 billion miles a year of travel. That comes out to an average of everything being 6 miles away from wherever you are. That's what the numbers come out to. I don't want to travel that far, other than going to the survey and filling out the other category. How can I say that not traveling that far is important?
Yeah, I mean, I would say submit that as a comment in the survey. You can certainly put it there. We're taking a comment. You can add comments to the website. There's just a comment box there if you have general thoughts that you want to share, and you can do the same thing through the map and just say, I think shorter trip distances is important.
Well, I thought there was no way to do it, and you just said that's correct. Other than just an other comment, there's no way to say we don't want to have to travel as much.
Yeah, I mean, you can say there is an option, I think, in your priorities for more destinations near me. It's shortening those travel distances, if that's getting at what you're saying, or if it's just having the option of taking less trips. One thing that we're looking at that might be interesting as kind of an outgrowth of this is that a lot of companies, and certainly we in government, have had to transition and learn how to work from home very quickly. So we didn't have a work from home policy in the city of Tucson prior to the stay-at-home order. We had to be in the office, and it was pretty inflexible in terms of when you had to be in the office. So we were contributing. We were all contributing to the peak. Both the city manager and our director have said, well, actually, our productivity has been high. People seem happy. We need to maybe revisit this policy and see maybe we can have more flexibility there. And I wonder how many in the private sector are going to be looking at the same thing, that they've proven that there might be more comfort with it, which may be a way of suppressing travel demand at the peaks, which is all we got to do is a couple % at those shoulder times. And that's a huge impact in terms of capacity.
Oh, and is that something, Patrick, you might look at as part of Move Tucson? I know that they're in some of the funding plans in order to get funding from the city for new industrial projects, et cetera. There's things like if you do some rainwater harvesting, or you have a bike to work policy or something like that, that the city will give you incentives. Is that a possibility that the city is going to start pushing new commercial ventures in the city to do work at home policies?
We're looking at expanding our travel demand management program, which would be the place where that would be happening. Right now, that's controlled at the regional level. PEG is in control of the travel demand management program. But I know there's interest departmentally to see if that would be something that we can have a stronger hand in. I don't know what that would look like. I can't say whether there'd be a carrot or a stick, but certainly I think there's an opportunity there, and I think this has been something that the stay-at-home order has presented.
I know of something that we have here in Montreal. We don't seem to have traffic in Tucson the way we do, but we have lanes that between 3 and during rush hour you cannot go in that lane unless there's more than one person in the car. It's to encourage car sharing, and quite a few people will leave their car at a certain parking space and commute with somebody else to take advantage of that faster lane. And they get fined. You'll be pulled over and fined if you're only single person driving in that special lane. Sometimes I think it's also the taxis, buses, and maybe more. They also have a special lane, and I can't remember if sometimes it's combined. But usually there's a bus lane, and you can't go in. You might not be able to go in at rush hour and so on. So this pushes advantage towards car share and bus use.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the diamond lanes in Phoenix. That's something that they've rolled out to encourage carpooling. Depending on how the interstate continues to operate, that would be one of the operational solutions that we'd look at, as well as putting the signals at the on-ramps, or another strategy that they use in Phoenix to kind of balance out the congestion. We're not there yet in our interstates, and I wouldn't anticipate something like that happening on our surface streets, but I guess it depends on what your outcomes or the purpose would be. It sounds like one, encouraging just a reduction in trips, I think, is a fantastic idea, and it's probably more encouragement from our end than enforcement. In Phoenix, and certainly we'd look at it here as a way of just flattening congestion and kind of improving the operations of the facilities. But again, that's something that travel demand management does. They work with the private companies over 100 employees, I believe, to look at all the strategies that they're employing to encourage either car sharing or carpooling, biking or walking to work or transit to work. We used to have a guaranteed ride home program, for example, but I think they gutted that.
And I do know that on at least part of Broadway, there's a dedicated bus lane, the rightmost lane. Is there a thought of expanding that on some of the other major arterials to give that advantage to the bus system that would otherwise be stuck in traffic?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the things that we'd be looking at when I was talking about that kind of excess capacity. If we have more lanes than we have the cars, then we could look at reallocating that to, bus only or bus bike lanes, for example. And that gets you most of the way to kind of the operating benefits of, say, a bus rapid transit if you have that dedicated travel lane. Short of doing that, one of the things that we're starting to look at more seriously, because most of the delay is happening at your intersections, it's not happening at your segments per se, would be looking at bus queue jumps or bus bypass lanes, basically allowing the bus to use the right turn lane as a through lane at the intersection, as long as there's a receiving lane on the other side, so that they can bypass the traffic queue and get into their stop on the far side of the lane without having to wait 1 to 2 to 3 cycles at the traffic signal. So without doing a full lane, there are kind of operational improvements that you can look at. Some of the other things that are a little more out there would be a queue jump. So we have queue jumps on the streetcar right now. So basically if the bus gets up to a red light and they're in the right turn lane, they would get the green. They could come across the intersection, get back into the travel lane before the green releases to the competing cars to the left of the bus. Or we could also look at rolling out transit signal priority. Basically, if a bus is approaching a traffic signal, there would be a communications between the bus and the signal the could hold green a little bit longer so the bus could clear the intersection. So we are looking at those strategies, and we'll be probably largely focusing on the intersections because it's really important to make sure that the buses are arriving on time to make sure that the ridership is there.
Here, buses have, there's a little white, it looks like an eye, and it precedes the green light, and it's an indication that the buses are allowed to go, but cars can't go yet.
Yep.
And so I guess that's what you're referring to, but it's in operation here.
So we have it at Broadway and 5th on the streetcar, because the streetcar needs to cross over there, so they get to go first.
Patrick, I've got your old PAG address. It's patrick.hartley@TucsonAZ.
Yep, that's right. patrick.hartley@TucsonAZ.gov.
Got it. Thank you.
Don't email me at IGT. Don't email me at PAG. I'm no longer with those organizations.
I figured that.
Okay, do we have any more thoughts or questions? All right, going once, going twice. Thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate you being here with us tonight. I'm very excited that the City of Tucson is taking the time to ask the citizens of Tucson what we want to see and taking that input seriously. I've been really impressed by just how on almost everything the city is doing, they're taking the time to really talk to the residents of the city rather than just saying, here's the plan, what do you think? You better like it because this is the plan. So I really do appreciate that you're taking the time for the public input. And I appreciate that you're taking the time to talk to us tonight. And for anyone who's interested, this recording will be on our YouTube channel. We have a Sustainable Tucson YouTube channel. So if you missed anything or you just want to watch it again or you want to catch a question you didn't quite hear, it will be on there.
And I would invite anybody, a member of another organization, a neighborhood group, or anything else, and you'd like a similar presentation and discussion with me or Andy Bemis, my co-project manager, please let us know. You can email me directly or move Tucson at TucsonAZ.gov, and we'll get it scheduled, and we can do this again. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yeah,
have a good night.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.